The greatest Viking glory was built on a foundation of systematic, calculated, and absolutely unimaginable suffering. I'm talking about the women they captured. They didn't just take hostages. They created an architecture of female suffering. They didn't just sell people. They ran the most sophisticated human trafficking system of the medieval world. And their law? It defined a captured woman not as a person but as animate property, a beast of burden whose death was treated as simple property damage. We're not talking about mythology today. We're talking about Sigrid, the Slavic woman who, in 922 AD, stood inside a tent on the banks of the Volga River, waiting to be strangled and stabbed by the angel of death. Here's the sickest part. Sigrid was one of the lucky ones. She knew her suffering would end in 10 minutes. For hundreds of thousands of others, their nightmare would last a lifetime. But before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. What time is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments. It helps the channel. And I think it's amazing seeing how people from around the world come together here to uncover forgotten history. The Viking Age began in 793 AD with the infamous raid on the monastery at Lindisfarne. But this wasn't just a smash and grab. This was a proof of concept. The Vikings, particularly the Norse and the Rus, quickly realized that the most valuable commodity they could plunder wasn't gold, it was human beings. They were creating a movable, reproducible, self-generating form of wealth. The sheer scale of this operation is staggering. Scholars estimate that over the course of the Viking Age, potentially 500,000 people, many of them women, were displaced and enslaved. This wasn't chaos, it was commerce. It was the thrall system. When a Viking longship landed, the raid was terrifying, but the aftermath was cold and precise. Captured women were immediately sorted, categorized, and assigned an economic value. They were livestock ready for market, and they fell into 4 key buckets. 1. The laborers. These were the older, stronger women. Their immediate future was one of unrelenting, back-breaking work, fetching water, grinding grain, tending fields. Their fate was simple: work until they literally collapsed. We have accounts of women, like one named Etheld, captured from England, who spent 20 years in Norway doing nothing but physical labor, their bodies becoming tools until they were discarded. 2. The breeders. These were young, healthy women of childbearing age. Their purpose was purely biological, to reproduce. Under Norse law, the children of a female thrall in Old Norse, automatically inherited her enslaved status. This made the breeder class a self-sustaining asset, an unending source of profit for the master. They were viewed as living factories. 3. The high-value investment. These women were the most prized. They were beautiful, young, or, critically, they were women of noble or educated status. A captured princess or a learned woman wasn't put to the millstone. She was cleaned, taught languages, Greek, Arabic, and prepared for a sophisticated resale. These were high-risk, high-reward assets, destined for the immense luxury markets of Constantinople or the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. 4. Value by skill. The price tag on a woman's head was directly linked to her utility. Think about this. A woman who could weave was worth 3 times as much as a woman who could not. Why? Because weaving produced valuable cloth, which could be traded. Similarly, women who could illuminate manuscripts, or those with rare healing or medical knowledge, commanded astronomical prices. The price of a thrall was calculated with a spreadsheet-like precision centuries before the invention of the computer. This system wasn't just barbaric, It was legalized. The most telling evidence comes from the Gragas, or the Grey Goose Laws of the Icelandic Commonwealth. These laws, first written down in the 12th century, but reflecting centuries of oral tradition, formalized the complete erasure of the slave woman's humanity. Under Gragas, a thrall was not a person. She was classified as animate property, or kvikfe, literally, live wealth. She had no legal identity, no rights, and no protection for her body. The body is property. A woman's entire person belonged to her owner. She could not refuse any use of her body, sexual or otherwise, which is why chroniclers like Ibn Fadlan record the casual, ritualistic abuse of slaves. Property damage, not murder. If a master killed his own thrall, it was simply an economic loss. If a neighbor killed a thrall, the perpetrator didn't face a murder charge. They paid the master the replacement value of the thrall. It was the legal equivalent of destroying a cart or poisoning an ox. The mourning gift. This chilling tradition stipulated that masters could routinely lend their female thralls to male guests as a gesture of hospitality. This was considered a generous act by the master, reinforcing the idea that the woman was a disposable object of pleasure, available to anyone who entered the household. This legal framework was critical because it allowed the Vikings to engage in brutality without feeling moral culpability. They were simply managing their property. The Viking economic engine required infrastructure, and they built it. They established massive trade hubs that weren't just for furs and iron, but for human beings. Dublin, founded by the Norse, became the western headquarters of the slave trade. Archaeologists and historians agree that the city's early economy was dominated by the human market. They had pens, feeding stations, and medical checkpoints to keep the human cargo healthy and ready for long-distance export. But the real money route was east. Along the great river systems of modern-day Russia, the Volga, and the Dnieper, the Swedish Vikings, known as the Rus, linked Scandinavia to the wealth of the East. From hubs like Staraya Ladoga and eventually Kiev, slaves were marched, rowed, and sold downriver. Their final destinations were often the magnificent markets of the Caliphate, where a single, high-value slave could be exchanged for enough Arabic silver dirhams to fund an entire expedition. This steady flow of human wealth didn't just enrich the Vikings. It poured so much silver into Scandinavia that Arabic coins are one of the most common archaeological finds from the Viking Age. Not every captured woman ended up on the long-distance trade route or at the grinding stone. Some faced a fate historians call genetic conquest. Take the daughters of defeated chieftains or nobility, like the hypothetical Irish Princess Brianna. When her father was killed, she might be forced to marry her Viking conqueror, sometimes within days. This wasn't a love match, it was a ruthless political strategy. It was a way to legitimize the Viking leader's claim to the conquered territory. The children born from this union carried the mother's native noble blood, but they were raised entirely as Norse. The Viking culture didn't just conquer the land, it absorbed the bloodline, making the subsequent generations undeniably Viking. Modern genetic studies bear this out. If you look at the female lineage of modern Icelanders, you find a massive component of Celtic DNA, Irish and Scottish, far exceeding what you'd expect from simple migration. It's the living biological proof of systematic sexual violence and forced marriage. The bodies of these women were literally the vessels through which Viking expansion was achieved. This brings us back to the banks of the river in 922, and the single most detailed eyewitness account of Viking ritual brutality recorded by the Arab traveler and diplomat Ibn Fadlan. The climax of the chieftain's funeral was the sacrifice of a thrall like Sigrid. For 10 days, she was kept drunk and treated as royalty, a living, doomed monument. Before the final act, she was taken to a temporary wooden frame, and 3 times, men placed her feet on their palms and lifted her up to look over the camp. Each time she described a vision of her dead master, and then of paradise. In her final moments, she was led into the wooden pavilion erected on the funeral ship, where she was ritually subjected to sexual violence by 6 warriors. The chronicler notes they said they were doing this out of love for him, the master. Finally, the angel of death, a terrifying older woman, approached with the rope and the dagger. While 2 men pulled the rope tight around her neck, the angel of death drove the dagger into the space between her ribs to ensure instant death. Her body was immediately laid next to her master, and the ship was engulfed in flames. When Ibn Fadlan expressed his horror, the Rus offered their chilling justification, saying, "You take the people who are most dear to you, and whom you honor most, and put them into the ground where insects and worms devour them. We burn him in a moment, so that he enters paradise at once." The Vikings were undeniably brilliant seafarers, explorers, and builders of nations. But we cannot celebrate the legend without acknowledging the truth that their wealth, their trade, and their expansion were financed and built on the bodies and the absolute, systematic dehumanization of hundreds of thousands of captured women. They were not myths. They were people whose existence was erased and repurposed. The least we can do is remember them. The least we can do is refuse to forget the invisible suffering that made visible glory possible. If this deep dive into history's hidden darkness has you hooked, please consider supporting the channel. It takes a lot of time and research to uncover these forgotten truths. To help us understand when the best time is to post new videos, please comment below and tell me what time it is right now in your location. We have so many more shadows to explore.